Okay, welcome back, everybody. I am Liv Barney. I use she, her pronouns. I am the co-chair of the exhibitions committee at 934 Gallery. We are a 100% run gallery, volunteer run gallery in Columbus, Ohio, in the Milo Grogan neighborhood. Today with us, we have Forest Kelley, who is one of our presenting artists currently in the gallery. And yes, he is showing within the installation gallery in our space. And yeah, I'm gonna leave it off to you, Forrest, to introduce yourself, kind of, your name, your background in art, what you currently do.
Yeah, I'm Forest Kelley, assistant professor of photography at the University of Kentucky. I was a grad student at the Rhode Island School of Design. Spent a lot of years sort of living and working in San Francisco in the photography and art worlds before grad school. And
Mhm.
yeah, I'm excited to be here with you.
Great, yeah. And then the exhibit for us, actually, his current exhibit with us is Tunnel Vision, select works from Michael. So we're just going to get a little more into that. So would you like to talk more about your current show and what kind of inspirations you have from it? Like what kind of inspired it?
Yeah, this was an interesting opportunity. So the exhibition space is sort of this long, narrow space. It's
Mhm.
sort of an intimate uh, space, interesting opportunity to make work that feels sort of close and personal in a way.
Yes.
And so after talking with sort of the exhibitions committee, we decided to do a selection of works from this larger body of work that I've been working on for many, many years called Michael. And the show title, Tunnel Vision, comes from sort of a quote, sort of this kind of understanding of my family or these things that are said
Hmm.
about my uncle, whose project revolves around. They used to say that Michael had tunnel vision, and in some ways I think that was sort of
Hmm.
metaphoric, right? Or they were talking about his personality as this kind of this person who is focused on very specific things, his work, and maybe not so much other things. And so, but it also kind of poked a little bit at this sort of experience that he had when he was younger. I'm not exactly sure what this was, but he had some sort of narrowing of his vision, literally. My
Mm.
father describes it as some sort of maybe mold or bacterial infection. And they sort of talk about that as him having tunnel vision as literally as a result of that, him seeing through this sort of narrow pathway. So that thinking about that, it was kind of a way to connect to both these understandings and of him and ways of thinking about him and his life. So I thought that was a really interesting metaphor in this sort of narrow exhibition space to kind of metaphorically frame the works that are in the show.
Great, yeah. So I want to ask, since you talked about how these are select works that you chose for the installation gallery specifically in our sort of narrow space, what made you choose, I guess, those specific works? Did you feel like they were sort of, I guess, more representative of what you wanted to show, or is there a specific idea you had in mind?
Yeah, so there's sort of this kind of maybe primary overarching idea of the work being sort of about both me, but also him trying
Hmm.
to understand or discover what his life was like, what it was about, what he was
Hmm.
thinking. So it was a way of, thinking about how he sees the world or how he was looking.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the works speak to that idea and also quite, literally also show a lot of people looking, gazing, maybe questioning.
Hmm.
So if you look around the show, there are works where um, people are looking at each other. Michael's
Yes.
looking at himself. There's a
Hmm.
picture of some ephemera that Michael collected, this little boy looking up at a plane in
Hmm.
the air. And so, all these ideas of kind of looking and understanding and questioning, those are the kind of primary reasons that I was choosing those works for the show.
Yeah, great, interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing that and stuff too. And then I also read within your artist statement, actually, that you made for the show specifically, that you incorporated also objects or films you found from your uncle. So
Yeah.
would you like to elaborate maybe upon that and like why you chose those? And are they all throughout your whole big collection, or,
Mhm.
why you chose that kind of?
Yeah, so in a way, this project is partly a desire to understand who Michael was and what his life
Mhm.
was like. So, there are a lot of my photographs, my sort of speculative works about his
Mhm.
life that are sort of
Yes.
imagined, sometimes based on stories, sometimes speculative. But because I do have some of his ephemera, or came to kind of discover, or um, become the caretaker of some of his belongings as I was doing the research for this work. That was also an opportunity for me to sort of let him speak for himself in a way in the show, or
Mhm.
just show the things that he collected and that he was photographing himself. So a really important component of that is this box of 8mm film that he was shooting as an aspiring filmmaker. And so a lot of the pieces are kind of segments, scans from these 8mm strips of film.
Mhm.
And, I'm kind of making these selections and sort of thinking about what it was that he was thinking, or wondering why it was that he was making footage of certain things,
Mhm.
and wondering if there's sort of windows into his life or his experience. And so these works, the 8mm pieces and the ephemera, kind of span the entire body of work and are sort of interspersed with sort of my more imagined or speculative photographs. And then, also including ephemera, or literally, or not in this show, but in some cases, but certainly photographs of ephemera and the things that he was collecting. Really just another window into his life, and to what why was he collecting certain objects? Why was
Mhm.
he interested in certain things? Those are the questions that are kind of open in my mind. And I think a lot of these pieces, some more directly than others, some maybe more raise more questions than others, but I'm just really interested in trying to kind of look at these objects and get a sense for how he was thinking about his own life and experience.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, definitely you can see that throughout the exhibit and the different film and photography that we're viewing when you talk about that. That definitely
Mhm.
ties like all the things together. So I guess a good follow-up question to that is, we talk about we're exploring Michael's life and different things like that. Is there specific reasons or inspirations that drew you to focus on your uncle and like look into his life, like why you chose that
Mhm.
specifically?
Yeah, so I grew up sort of with an unusual proximity to him. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he died when I was just shy of 5 years old, but he
Mm-hmm.
lived on my parents' property. There's sort of a double exposure photograph of a cabin in the show.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the cabin that he lived in when he died of a presumed suicide in the summer of 1985.
Mm-hmm.
And growing up, in a way, that cabin was Michael to me. I didn't really kind of, in a way, think of him as a person for many years. We
Mm-hmm.
called that cabin Michael's cabin. And it wasn't until, maybe I was in middle school or high school that I started to really wonder, who was this person? Who was this person that was living in this one room cabin without water and electricity on my parents' property? Who would he have been to my life? Would he have been an inspiration, a mentor? He
Mm-hmm.
was an artist and sort of an avant-garde thinker, which is, a little bit rare, a little bit unusual in the
Mm-hmm.
small rural town that we grew up in central Massachusetts. And so I started asking those questions. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to know about who he was, or maybe, to say it another way, to know maybe who I would have been if he was in my life growing up.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah, so the work sort of grew out of that. I first started collecting his things. There was a steamer trunk that was in my parents' attic, that, for all I knew, had sort of everything of his that existed in the world, and it was
Mm-hmm.
sort of tucked away in there. We didn't really talk that much about it. And so I sort of just started poking around in there, and then eventually asked my mother. Michael's my father's brother, but
Okay.
I knew that my father wouldn't let me take this thing. So I asked my mother,
Mm-hmm.
and she said, sure, you can, sort of quietly take possession of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started looking through there, and, it included everything, like all of his ephemera, notebooks, journals, kind of poems scratched out on things, artwork, paint supplies, oil paints, like half-started artworks, doodles, all kinds of things, his film. And so I started to come to understand him in a way. And the work really grew out of there, and then kind of eventually expanded to me trying to figure out who his friends were and who
Mm-hmm.
maybe people were outside of his network.
Yes.
Um, so the work really, started from my own kind of both curiosity about this
Mm-hmm.
person who, you know, in the beginning of my life, maybe I didn't even think of as a person, but the more that I came to, you know, be curious about him, the more I felt compelled to kind of keep digging into this story.
That's great. Yeah, because the way you even describe it, how you talked about if you were get to know him more and stuff, is like being a mentor, possibly, or like inspiring you. Definitely, it sounds like that just from the items you're able to find and the notes you were able to see the scribbles and stuff you're talking about. Definitely
Mhm.
sounds like even in a way he still inspired you in that sort of capacity. So,
Yeah, for sure. And you know, there's no question that I have sort of a primary responsibility of authorship in a way, right, for this
mhm,
work because he, you know, he's deceased, and
yeah.
so really, you know, the work is inevitably sort of my voice, but I
Mhm.
really like the idea that in some ways this show can be something of a collaborative exhibition, that, you know,
Yes.
Michael, who died, you know, at a very young age,
Mhm.
just shy of 28 years old, just a few days before his 28th birthday actually, um, that, you know, he wanted to be a fully realized artist, you know, a creative
Mhm.
person, and you know, I don't think he really had the opportunity to do that or to live that continue life that I assume that he wanted to live. And you know, in a way, it's fun or interesting to think about this show as partly a collaborative exhibition. You know, that his works are
Yeah.
in the show.
Mhm.
There may be just fragments of his film, or fragments of his ephemera or works, but they're still there, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, you could definitely feel the voice. It's like when I say that, like you feel it just by seeing it. Because like when I view the exhibition, you can definitely see that personal aspect and like trying to learn, just as you talked about, like seeing the stories behind both your work and your uncle, who we get to see like your voices and them coming together, but also being their own narratives. And I
Mhm.
also like that part of your artist statement where and you've kind of just said it already, where you're like letting him speak for himself from the photos you've also shown. So definitely it's all very like interesting, and thank you for sharing all of this stuff. So I guess I'm going more into another thing, exploring more what you talked about. As you also talked about some of your uncle's friends and this sort of subject matter, were you able to talk to any like friends or family in connection to your uncle and like in order to build your own show as well? Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. You know, there are some people who are, you know, this work wouldn't be what it is or here at all if it wasn't for a handful of people. Particularly, I maybe would like to shout out Greg Graziani, one of
Mhm.
Michael's best friends growing up, who, you know, not only kind of shared a lot with me, but I spent
Mhm.
a number of years ago a week with him in Florida, and you know, he really let me know so much about what Michael's life was like growing up, particularly, you know, in their younger years. His friend Cynthia, who I also spent some time with, she is a person who kind of put me in touch with this really important collective of people, this commune called Butterworth Farm in
Mhm.
Royalton, Massachusetts, and that sort of tragically, the commune was started as a sort of back to the land commune founded by five gay men in 1973,
Mhm.
and the four of the founders ended up dying of HIV/AIDS by the early 90s. But this man, Alan Young, is still alive and is a really fantastic person. He would, once I was sort of put in touch with him or found out about him, um, that really opened up this project for me. He was really one of the first people that I connected to that was sort of outside my family network and
Okay.
outside the people that maybe Michael grew up with in his younger years. And Alan very generously invited me to sort of their 40th year anniversary party. Michael went to their 10th year anniversary party. And so, you know, Alan and Butterworth Farm in general, Dennis Helmus, people like that really really expanded my view of who Michael was and this whole history. I could
Mhm.
actually shout out Alan Young
Oh,
here.
there we go. Yeah. Well, yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's so great. And then Another thing that's also on like the connection of community, I guess, is when we're reading about your work and your statement specifically on this show, as you often like to talk about the rural Western Massachusetts and things like that. And you just mentioned that as well. We're talking about where you grew up. Is that also something you like to explore in your larger work, or is it specifically for this show? Would you like to talk more about that part of it?
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting question. There Most of my work that kind of deals with Massachusetts and sort of rural Massachusetts is
Mm-hmm.
mostly confined to this work. I've done some other photographic work that and projects that are sort of revolve around New England,
Mm-hmm.
and other people living in that area. But just thinking back quickly, I think Michael is pretty much the primary project where I'm sort of
Mm-hmm.
thinking a lot about these kind of parts of home or extended networks related to, you know, where I grew up or where Michael grew up.
Mm-hmm. Kind of those different intersections of life and how they come together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, partly what's interesting about this project, Michael, is like I'm really interested in what this experience was for gay men living in sort of the early days of AIDS in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
and what those experiences were, particularly in that time and that place, and dealing with issues of homophobia within that time period. And there are, you know, it's interesting to think about those experiences, but also it's interesting to think about those extended social networks as well. So, you
Mm-hmm.
know, in this time, the early 80s, before social media, you know, there were a lot of people sort of transitioning from rural spaces to urban spaces to
Mm-hmm.
communes and kind of these sort of utopic, you know, communal spaces. And so, you know, certainly this work is an investigation of those spaces too, as well, you know, kind of extending from this small town of Barry to
Mm-hmm.
the commune in rural Royalston, Western Massachusetts, to kind of more urban spaces in Boston and New York and Providence, Rhode Island. So, you know, the work kind of grows and extends into these other places as well.
Yeah, just like it naturally just does that because these are these people's lives, and we're talking about how we're looking through the different views of just how life organically happens. Hmm. Definitely.
Sure, and you know, things too like homophobia
Hmm.
or discovery of identity and self. It sort of necessitates sometimes
Yeah,
leaving your home, leaving the place where maybe you want to be comfortable or come to know yourself, but maybe is not really possible in that time and place. And so I think for
definitely.
Michael, figuring out who he was necessitated him visiting the commune, visiting Boston, visiting San Francisco, these types of things. And so, you know, I think we all have these desires to know ourselves,
Hmm.
and discover kind of more complex facets of ourselves. And you know, that's certainly the case for gay men in the early 80s, even, you know, gay people
Hmm.
today, gay queer people today.
Hmm.
um,
Definitely, you still
so
have that community aspect you're talking about, where
sure.
if you, when you want to grow up, like sometimes you need to leave the places that you really wanted to stay. So definitely, like what you're saying, it even continues into today. So
Sure.
yeah. And then to talk more, I guess, specifically about your work, because we also talked about your uncles and the film and all those experiences. Was there anything specifically you wanted to focus in your own photography on this show? Or was it just very similar concepts that we've already talked about?
Yeah, I wanted to
Hmm.
just make sure that I was kind of fleshing out uh, a certain specific narrative within this kind of concept of tunnel vision,
Hmm.
but also that I was kind of demonstrating a certain or showing a certain kind of breadth within the work
Yes.
and within the narratives. So there are just sort of, maybe I can look at the exhibition here a little bit.
Yes, go
Um,
ahead.
so there are a few pieces. Like there's a photograph of this character who plays my uncle, in this
Hmm.
car, sort of looking backwards, and there's another person sort of that you can see part of his body through the window. And for me, that picture is really about these kind of concepts of Michael sort of thinking about leaving or looking
Hmm.
to other possibilities, other places, kind of searching and discovering, both being present maybe in a new community, but also looking to what's next. So, you know, in that way, his gaze is sort of kind of speaking to these concepts of tunnel vision and wondering, what the world has to offer. There's another photograph that is in sort of a larger sort of urban interior space. And that photograph for me is really thinking about these sort of transitional spaces, visiting kind of bars and things. Maybe in this place specifically, this photograph was made in Providence, Rhode Island. And thinking about these kind of important places. So, and that photograph actually is really important to me.
The more urban one you just mentioned?
Yeah.
Yes.
The person who's on the sort of left part of the photograph.
Yes, I definitely know what you're talking about.
Yeah, he's one of my sort of primary collaborators, Jorge Urena, and he lives in Providence. He's also an artist, and the reason we were photographing there in the first place is because we had sort of a plan to photograph in this building, and last minute these people told us that we just couldn't go in there and photograph. So he's close with the people at this gay club called the Dark Lady in downtown Providence, Rhode Island. And so he asked them if we could photograph in there, and they generously let us kind of work in their space for this entire weekend. And so, I don't know, that was kind of just a really fun experience, and, a really interesting way to kind of participate in the space in this city too, where my uncle visited his friend Greg many times, and to kind of think about these sort of spaces of meeting, spaces of community, and spaces of sort of transition within my uncle's life.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing all that. And like all the multiple points you mentioned from the first photograph we talked about, where it's the person who's acting as your uncle and looking out. I definitely like that point you talked about, where it's not just in the present, but it's also that sort of, and almost in a metaphorical sense, it's looking towards what could be. That's so great to like hear about that and for you to like expand upon that. And then with the most recent photograph we talked about, that's also really cool how you talked about not only was that where your uncle went, but also talking how you yourself took that photograph. And that the community also helped in that way too. So it's interesting just how you told that story of like, oh, you can't take the photograph here, but then the community then helped you out in that way. They're like, oh, but you can take a photograph in our area. It just goes to show you that sort of connection and storytelling, and when people want to help out in that way, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I can also just kind of say that the Pulse nightclub shooting happened like the week after we made this photograph, which was a terrible tragedy, and really made me think about how much sort of these institutions, gay bars, gay clubs, are really kind of places of community, are important social
definitely. They're not just bars in the sense of how maybe non-gay people think about them. It's very, much that community point you're talking about. Sorry for interrupting. Keep going. So. Yeah.
And and thinking about that act of generosity by them, by that network, for me in this project and for my uncle, is just really powerful, I think. And so it's important to recognize that.
Were there any other moments like that when you're taking your photographs where community members helped you or they allowed you to take photographs in other places? Do you have any other, I guess, stories you want to share about any of the other photographs and taking them?
Yeah, for sure. I can just talk maybe generally about various aspects of the project. I mean, a number of photographs were taken on the Butterworth commune, because Alan Young, one of the founders, invited me there and then let me come back and make pictures in that space. My primary collaborator, the person who came to play my uncle, I actually met him at the Butterworth commune at their 40th year anniversary. Cool. Yeah, it was kind of an amazing experience. So one of the kind of friends of the founder gave me this sort of red sequin dress to wear to the the red ruby red ball, and so I was there, and this person who I met there introduced me to this person, or was going to introduce me to this person, and this was well before I thought that I was going to even find somebody to play my uncle. How do you do that? How do you find somebody to stand in for them?
For a family member and stuff like that.
Yeah, you just can't find just an actor to do that. so this person, this new friend, was going to introduce me to these other people, and as I was walking up, this person, Achilles, he was talking about kind of collecting psychedelic music from the 60s and 70s, and kind of building this collection. He was wearing this sort of paisley shirt with red bell-bottom pants, and
Yes, yeah.
he had long curly hair, and it was just like meeting my uncle in this place that he had been so many years before.
Yeah.
And so we became friends after that, and I was telling him about the project at some point, and he was all for kind of participating in the project, and kind of standing in for my uncle. And so we came to collaborate for a good couple of years, making pictures off and on, as a result of that experience. And that wouldn't have happened if Alan hadn't invited me there to that 40th anniversary party. So, in a way, the work is like, I can say this, projects like these, in some ways, like, my name is on the show title or whatever, but these projects are really collaborative projects. They happen, the pictures are made because of other people participating, other people sharing their histories, other people, shaping how the images look or what is photographed, how things are photographed. And so these are really collaborative projects that, involve the kind of voices of so many people. So I'm really grateful for that and grateful for their participation. I can also share another really kind of powerful sort of experience. So when I was at the 40th year anniversary party, was sort of a 3-day event. And on one of the days, I was sort of walking, I was on this sort of walking tour with a group of people around what was formerly the commune property. And this Dennis Helmus was walking with me at some point, and he said, I heard you were coming, and I have this letter that I was trying to find that your uncle sent to me. He was like, I couldn't find it, but if I can, I will send it to you in the mail. And so then a few months later, I received this letter in the mail, and inside it was this postcard from my uncle to the commune, and he addresses all of the people there, I think after maybe the first time that he visited. And at the end, he says he thinks he found a little piece of Eden, and sort of thanks them for letting him come there and sort of showing them that place. And for me, that was a really powerful thing. Sort of, it felt like I received this letter from him in a way,
Yeah, it was his own words. It was like a portal into not only that time, but like in how he felt, but just like actually talking to him probably, or like listening to him.
Yeah, and it's really nice to know that somebody like Dennis held on to this postcard for so many years, and then was also generous enough to kind of pass that along to me.
Yeah, definitely those words of like that we keep repeating, from like collaboration to community. It definitely, I can definitely see that in your work and how you're talking about this is really like a team effort and a collaboration with your whole show, and just how everything kind of has happened throughout the making of these works. So thank you for sharing those stories. Those are so impactful, and I think they add even more to what we've been talking about and the work you've shown. So I have like questions like, do you think you want to explore this subject more, this work more, specifically from Michael, or do you think you've kind of told the story you want to tell, or do you want to look in more into it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer. In some ways, projects like these, I'm not sure that they ever end.
Yeah.
I've put a lot of kind of time over the last number of years to kind of
Because you've
fleshing
mentioned
out this
years.
project to a point where I think it expresses sort of something of a complete story or a complete arc, one facet of his life, and in some ways the work is sort of complete in that sense. But I also don't know that it's possible to kind of call it complete. I still keep learning things. I still have ideas for kind of pictures, or for visualizing parts of his life, or ideas or thoughts about his life. So yeah, in some ways it maybe never will end. And it's a great opportunity to have shows like this, not only just to share the work, but also because it's an excuse to kind of look into these different facets of the work. So, with this show, this new kind of framing of tunnel vision, has allowed me to kind of look at one kind of specific sort of facet or framing of his
Mm-hmm.
life. I had an exhibition last year at Moreland Gallery, Transylvania University, and
Mm-hmm.
the curator, Paul Brown, was really interested in showing some of the ephemera that kind of that sort of had spawned a lot of this work. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was a really great excuse to kind of to look into that in a deeper way in terms of showing it to other
Mm-hmm.
people. And so, I hope that I can kind of keep finding ways to kind of keep telling the story and fleshing it out and contributing to it.
Yeah, definitely, because I can kind of understand that as an artist. So when I asked you yourself, I was like, well, it could go either way, but I want to hear what Forrest has to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So yeah.
mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a
Mm-hmm.
tendency within the photography world to think
Mm-hmm.
about projects as coming to completion,
Yes.
especially being defined within books specifically.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's maybe more important to think about art as something that is alive and can continue to grow
Mm-hmm.
and can continue to kind of take shape even after there are these sort of declarative moments,
Yeah.
exhibitions and things like that. So for me, I think the work is still alive. I think it is still growing. And though in some ways this project is I'm contributing to it in a more slow way
Mm-hmm.
at this time. I hope that it will keep growing in a way, because I hope that this idea of who Michael is to me also gets to keep growing for me and for other people, for our kind of family and community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really important thing about artwork.
Yes, definitely. That's wonderful. Yeah, you very much summed it up greatly. So, I guess so we've talked about your show and all the different subjects. Is there anything that's coming next? Any future exhibitions or works you're working on right now? Mhm.
Yeah, there are a few big projects in my life right now. I would say the big project that I'm really in the kind of
Mhm.
throes of research with right now is a project called Virtual Worker Diaries.
Mhm.
And I've really become interested in um, these online kind of spaces where people are sort of doing work for really kind of often small sums of money, doing
Mhm.
virtual work. And in these somewhat kind of often anonymous or invisible platforms. And I think for me, I'm really kind of questioning through this work the potential social problems of building community and building networks upon these kind of economic social kind of platforms that really kind of sever our relationships from one another.
Mhm.
And so in this project, I'm basically commissioning people to, instead of doing other work, to tell me about their lives. And the project will sort of culminate in these kind of a mix of works, but it will largely be sort of these animated videos where I'm collaborating with other virtual workers afterwards to kind of fully, though in an impossible way, attempt to visualize and fully kind of embody, animate these people who are otherwise completely unreachable.
Mhm.
So, in a way, the concepts are similar to Michael. Like with Michael, there's sort of this documentary aspect to understanding what his life was like, and then an attempt to kind of use imagination or people's hopes and fears to kind of help illustrate how these people live and how
Mhm.
he lives in people's minds in the wake of his death. In this work, I'm trying to kind of attempt to do the impossible, to
Mhm.
understand who these virtual workers are, what brings them to these places where they're through their own interest in working anonymously, or
Mhm.
maybe in some cases being forced there by lack of other options, to kind of attempt to, again, do the impossible, come to understand who these people are, what their
Mhm.
lives look like, when that, because of the nature of these platforms, that question is effectively impossible to answer.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I can't wait to see it. Have you already like developed these, or is it still in the process? We don't even have any like finished pieces yet.
Yeah, yeah. There are some kind of preliminary
Hmm.
video works that you can see on my website
Hmm.
that sort of illustrate how these animated figures, the video components will
Hmm.
exist. There's a plan for a kind of full installation model that will be more physical, more kind of experiential,
Hmm.
and won't simply be a collection of single channel videos. And so you can check those out on the website. There are also a collection of diptychs with sort of these sort of forensic face composites
Oh, that's
alongside
interesting. Yeah. Hmm.
people's stories. Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about this, although again, it's impossible to know whether these stories are true or fiction because I'm quite literally commissioning people to tell me stories about their lives. So they very well may be lying to me. But I think what's powerful is that if you interact with people and ask them about themselves,
Hmm.
you learn a lot of really powerful things. And it's stories like those that don't aren't on the surface, that aren't present within a normal kind of commercial financial interaction
Hmm.
exchange. And so, I hope what the stories will do is call people to question these types of relationships and engagements. I certainly believe that there's a role for privacy, and there is an asset to that. But I think we should also question um, our own motivations when we're hiring people, but basically giving up our own kind of responsibility as a
Hmm.
community member in that role. So anyway, I think the works are and the stories are really quite powerful.
Yeah, definitely. I can tell just like from the work I've currently seen and the work you're talking about, you're in the process of making. I definitely love that whole wanting people to be able to tell their own stories. And I definitely like how you write that and both say that, and that you want them to be able to have their own voices and also tell their stories, whether it's through your work or talking to you. That's
Mhm.
definitely very impactful.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
kind of continuing from what you said, you're on your website. As we're coming to a close on this talk, do you have a website, social media handles? Is there anything you want to share so people can find you and more of your work?
Sure, yeah, yeah. Forestkelley.net is my website. Forestkelley,
Hmm.
like the Star Trek actor. Not intentional, but it is true. And so I try to keep things up to date there. So newer works like Virtual Worker Diaries tend
Hmm.
to kind of find their way there. Also on Instagram, Forest_Kelley. Is where I sort of share a lot of images and things about kind of current work and practice, exhibitions like 934 Gallery, and other sort of things and new developments in the work. So feel free to check that out. And yeah, those are my primary sort of online platforms.
Great. Thank you for sharing those, and
Mhm.
everybody check those out and give Forrest a follow. And then, Forrest, is there any last words or things you want to expand upon, whether it's this show or your other things you do? Or everyone?
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's about it.
That's
It's
it.
been
Yeah.
really nice to share so much about this project, and I really loved having this exhibition with all of you and at 934 Gallery. It's really a special opportunity, and I really appreciate that. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what happens next at your gallery.
Great. Well, thank you, Forrest. And again, this is 934 Gallery. I'm Liv Barney, one of the exhibition's co-chairs. We are a 100% volunteer-run gallery in Columbus, Ohio, in the Milo Grogan neighborhood. So if you like this talk that Forrest and I had, or any of our other artist talks, please feel free to donate on our website, 934gallery.org. We have a donate button, and it will help us continue to show artists and give artists opportunities just like this one and our current shows. If you want to check out Forrest's current show, we have open hours every Saturday from noon to 3 p.m. and it is absolutely free. So feel free to stop in, schedule a visit. It's at no cost to anybody. And yeah, thank you, Forrest, again. And
Yeah,
then
thank
you
you,
can
Liv.
check out
Really
this
appreciate it.
work too. Yeah, you can also check out Forrest's work if you can't check it out in person. You can also go to our website, and we also have social media handles on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you, everybody.